All right. Good morning, and thank you for listening to Pacific Northwest Sports. Here's our Week 8 update. It was crazy, to say the least. All right, we have your UW Huskies who played Arizona State, and they escaped with a 15-7 win. I mean, come on. UW was all out of sorts, and Michael Penix did not follow up his Heisman moment from last week. If not for a pick six by Washington's defense, this game would have been over and ASU would have won because they were all out of sorts. Remember how I always say you have to be able to run the ball to win games? Yeah, UW ran for 13 yards, and by all accounts, they should have lost this game. UW will need to make sure they don't have any more sloppy games because the rest of their schedule is brutal. They have Utah, USC, Oregon State, and Wazoo left on the schedule. I understand Wazoo has been playing well, but it's a rivalry game and anything can happen. The player of the game is DB Michelle Powell, who had the pick six that gave UW the spark they needed to pull away and win that game. UW's going to play Stanford next week. On over to Wazoo, who played Oregon and got it handed to them. A loss 24-38. Oregon came back in their throwback uniforms and pretty much whooped Wazoo's butt. There was some struggles. Wazoo kept it close in the first half, but Oregon was just too much in the second half. Despite godly numbers put up by Cam Ward, Wazoo just isn't able to win these games, and a lot of it's happening because they don't have any sort of running game. I'm not sure what the exact stat is, but I'm sure they're the bottom half of the NCAA in rushing. I mean, it is pitiful. Oregon's player of the game, though, is Bucky Irving, who had 15 carries for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 3 receptions for 51 yards and another touchdown. Wazoo will play Arizona State next week. Oregon will prepare for a big game against Utah next week. Over to Eastern Washington, where the Eastern Washington Eagles play Weber State, where they came out victorious 31-23. Eastern is out here grinding out wins, even if they have to play 3 different quarterbacks, or for one play, have all 3 quarterbacks on the field at once. Let's start in the fourth quarter where Weber State was ahead 20 to 14. Eastern answered with a touchdown to take the lead 24-20, and with 12 minutes left, 2 minutes later, Weber State answered with a field goal to take the score to 23-24. And now, if Weber State can get a stop, this game will more than likely be over because Weber State's offense is running efficiently. But not so fast. Eastern Washington got the ball back, and with 10:21 left in the fourth quarter, won on a 14-play, 84-yard drive while chewing up 8 minutes and 40 seconds of clock and capped it off with a touchdown to make the score 31-23. Game over, right? Wrong. Weber State would drive down the field, and with 13 seconds left on 4th and 8, Weber State would drop back. They'd throw up a pass where true freshman DB Derek Gantner, who was yet to play a single snap of college football, not one, knocks down the ball to give Eastern their homecoming win and ice the game. Player of the game, Jared Taylor, 17 rushes, 79 yards, and 1 touchdown. Weber State has a bye next week where Eastern Washington will play Portland State next week. Over to Central Washington, where your Central Washington Wildcats played West Texas A&M and got the win 30-14. Funny how scores can make a game sound somewhat close when that's not what happened at all. Central was up 3 at the end of the first quarter, and West Texas responded with a touchdown. And from that point on, until 1 minute left in the fourth quarter, they were held scoreless. Central Washington would pile on the score and end up winning 30. The final score should have read 30-7. However, with 1 minute left, West Texas A&M was able to get on the board and score themselves some points. The player of the game is Tyler Flanagan, who had another lethal game on the ground, rushing for 26 times for 188 yards and 1 touchdown. Central Washington University will play Texas A&M Kingsville next week. Your Pacific Lutheran Lutes played Lewis and Clark College and won 49-14. PLU is able to keep their winning streak alive with a convincing win over Lewis and Clark. From the start, you could tell PLU wanted this game. The opening kickoff was taken back to the house for a tutty, quickly putting the Lutes up 7-0. From there, It was just a rolling amount. The player of the game, Darius Shafin, who went 17 of 20 for 276 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also added 7 rushes for 65 yards and another touchdown. Lewis and Clark will play Whitworth next week, and PLU will take on George Fox University. Here we go over to your Puget Sound Loggers, who played Linfield Wildcats and lost 6-55. Now, Linfield continued their undefeated season with a strong win over Puget Sound. There's really not much to say about this game. Linfield's win today was their 30th straight win in Northwest Conference play and the 33rd straight win over the Loggers. Player of the game, Linfield quarterback Easton Blake, who went 16 of 23 for 196 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also threw his first interception of the year, which is extremely impressive to be this deep into the year and finally have a turnover. Puget Sound will play Willamette University next week, and Linfield will play against Pacific next week. Your Whitworth Pirates played Pacific Boxers and came out victorious 42-20. Now, Whitworth remains undefeated with another impressive win, but don't let the score fool you. The Boxers put up 13 points in the fourth quarter to make this game sound competitive, but Whitworth started the game in a nice rhythm. They scored on 5 of their first 7 possessions of the first half. Want an idea of how dominant this Pirates team has been? They've outscored opponents 143-34 in the first half this season. That's part of the reason you're not going to see as many godly numbers from Whitworth. They're able to rest some of their starters in the second half because they're just that much better. Now, the player of the game, I have 2 of them. Defensive back Daniel McKiernan, who had 9 tackles and 2 interceptions. This brings his total up to 6 interceptions on the year, which is leading the Northwest Conference. And wide receiver Evan Liggett, who had 7 receptions for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Boxers will play at Linfield next week, and Whitworth will look to stay undefeated next week as they take on Lewis and Clark, a team they have beaten the last 10 times they have played them. Over to Oregon, where we had your Portland City Vikings play Idaho State Bengals, where they lost 24-38, excuse me. In a game that sounds close, it really wasn't. But let me explain this for you. The first 8 minutes dictated this game. In those first 8 minutes, the Vikings got a total of 15 offensive yards while allowing the Bengals to score 14 points. From that point on, it was the Vikings trying to play catch-up, and they aren't good enough to do that. I want to shout out Idaho State because this year alone, they've won more games than their past 2 years combined. They're no longer a bottom-tier Big Sky team, and it's amazing to see. They're competitive right in the middle, and hopefully, with a couple more strong recruiting classes, they can be in the upper echelon. The player of the game is Bengals running back Hunter Hayes, who had 10 rushes for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. Portland State will play Eastern Washington University next week, and the Bengals will play Sacramento State next week. Over to your Western Oregon Wolves, who played Midwestern State and lost 6-33. Western Oregon took a tough loss in a game that sounds competitive as it truly was. If not for a 69-yard touchdown run, we could very well be talking about the Wolves being shut out this week. Western Oregon will look to get back in the winning column next week as they play at Texas Permian Basin. The George Fox Bruins played Willamette this last week and won 63-10. Definitely the least exciting game of the week. Neither one of these teams is having their best season this year, and it shows. George Fox picked a great time to get their second win of the season, and I commend them for it. Complete domination versus a Willamette team, who I am sure at this point wishes they could just hit reset on the season. Player of the game, quarterback Demontre Thomas, who went 21 of 34 for 293 yards and 2 touchdowns. Willamette will play Puget Sound next week, and George Fox will play PLU next week. Your Southern Oregon Raiders played Montana State Northern and won 42-13. Now, if you would have told me at the beginning of this year that Southern Oregon would be in the middle of a frontier conference that is all out of whack right now, I would have told you you were crazy. Yet, here we are. Now, this game isn't shocking in the fact that the win is expected. After all, Montana State Northern has lost 66 of their last 67 conference games. But Southern Oregon winning this game and remaining competitive in what is a amazingly deep frontier conference is really impressive. They somewhat hold their own destiny. Now, the Northern Lights will play Montana Western next week, And Southern Oregon will look to climb the rankings of the Frontier Conference next week when they take on Carroll College, who just lost a tough game. We'll talk about that right now as we head into Idaho, where the College of Idaho Coyotes played Carroll, and College of Idaho won 35-21. Now, this is my game of the week. Okay, last week I called it, and it lived up to it. I predicted a College of Idaho win 35-28. Instead, it was 35-21. I was only off by 7 points. Pat on the back, great. Frontier Conference play at its finest. And with crazy results comes conference shakeups, such as your College of Idaho Yotes being number 1 in the Frontier Conference. Now, the first quarter was all about feel, as the score ended 0-0. No one doubted that this game was going to be very methodical, very calculated. Second quarter starts, and your Yotes score, then your Saints score, and then your Yotes score with 12 seconds left. Halftime, the score is 14-7 Yotes. Third quarter is a replica as scoring goes Yotes, Saints, Yotes. Now we enter the fourth quarter with the score 28-14 College of Idaho. Fourth quarter comes around and Carroll scores, and then the Yotes answer again. Now this game was a ton of back and forth, but the Yotes came out victorious, as you can tell, 35-21. Now, I said whoever's going to win this game needs their guy to play out of their mind and help them with the win, right? Player of the game, John Schofield, who I said was College of Idaho's guy, okay? He didn't have a ton of yards. He only touched the ball 8 times, but in those 8 times, he did the following: 4 rushes for 7 yards and a touchdown, 4 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown. Although minimal, I don't think we can sleep on the fact that 2 touchdowns from their star guy is by exactly how much they won this game by. It's impressive. Schofield is well on his way to potentially being MVP of the Frontier Conference. Carroll will play Southern Oregon next week, and the Yotes will play Eastern Oregon next week. Over to Montana, where you had your University of Montana Bobcats play Sacramento State, where they won 42-30. Being played on ESPN welcomes some new fans to the Montana State Bobcats. With the score 14-7 at halftime in favor of the Bobcats, we wondered how this team was ranked because they didn't look like themselves at all. But then, the Wildcats did what they do best. They ran the ball for 328 yards, and it was their 5th consecutive game doing so. Player of the game, I have 2 of them. Running back Julius Davis, who had 12 attempts for 110 yards and 1 touchdown, and running back Tommy Mellett, who had 17 attempts for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Montana State will play Idaho next week. This is not the game of the week for my picking. However, this game is huge because it's going to dictate a lot for the playoffs. I think Montana State will make the playoffs. I also think Idaho will make the playoffs. I would hate to be a team and have to play them in the first round, or have to have them come to my house and play me, because both teams are extremely good. The likelihood is neither one of these teams is going to be a number 1 seed, but I feel bad for whoever's got to play them. Montana Western Bulldogs will play Arizona Christian University, and they won 34-30. Clearly, the 8 p.m. kickoff didn't bother the Bulldogs, as they kept up the wins they have been getting all this year. I will say ACU is 2-6 this year, so you would hope this would be a blowout win, yet the Bulldogs weren't able to do that. Instead, they had a lethal attack on offense. Now, the Bears are 3rd in the Frontier Conference with some... The Bulldogs are 3rd in the Frontier Conference with some big games coming up. Perhaps week 10, they have the game of the week, but I'm not going to get into that just yet. Player of the game, Michael Palandri, who had 9 attempts for 77 yards and 1 touchdown. Bulldogs will play MSU Northern next week. Your Montana Tech Orediggers played Rocky Mountain College and fell 21-28. Upset alert, and good for Rocky Mountain. At one point, they were in a 21-7 hole, so it was nice to see the Bears fight back. The second half was dominated by the Bears defense, as clearly they were looking to go home with a win. They forced fumbles, sacks, and TFLs. The Bears simply refused to lose, and it paid off. The Frontier Conference is in shambles right now with all the upsets going on, and I'm sure the Bears are happy to be contributing to the problem. Player of the game, Rocky Mountain running back Graydon Buell, who had 14 attempts for 135 yards and 1 touchdown. Montana Tech will play Arizona Christian next week. Rocky Mountain has a bye. Over to Utah. Your BYU Cougars played Texas Tech, and they won 27-14. And what an impressive win by BYU. Perhaps the most complete game they've played all year, with a caveat. BYU went into halftime up 24-17. The offense was clicking, and so was the defense. Now, the second half, BYU's defense really rose to the occasion, but the offense couldn't get anything going. And this can't be the norm. I'm hoping BYU uses this way as a gain more momentum and be even more competitive. They are 1 win away from bowl eligibility. The player of the game is quarterback Keaton Slovis, who went 15 of 27 for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. BYU will play Texas next week. Over to your Utah Utes, who played USC and won 34-32. Have you ever seen a player will a team to a win? Meaning, no matter what happens, he's going to make sure they win. It happened Saturday when Bryson Barnes won this game for Utah. Before I get to him, let's talk about how great this game was. Going into halftime, the score was locked at 14-14. After a third quarter that was dominated by Utah, it looks like Utah was going to walk out of LA with the win. But not so fast. With 8:24 left in the fourth quarter, the score was 31-23 Utah. But then, with 3 minutes left, USC kicked a field goal to make it a 5-point game. Then USC got a stop on defense and had an amazing punt return to set up USC on the 15-yard line. Caleb Williams answered the bell and scored on a quarterback draw. USC had its first USC had its first lead of the game since the first quarter. Tongue twisters. And it looked like USC was going to pull off the improbable comeback against a strong Utah defense. Now, Utah's offense has been nothing to brag about all year. In fact, I've openly been saying Cam Rising, wait for Cam Rising, wait for Cam Rising. Well, now we're at the point where it sounds like Cam Rising probably won't be coming back this year. In fact, he's probably going to end up medical redshirting, which is interesting for next year. We'll see how that actually ends up running out. However, Utah's quarterback, Bryson Barnes, got the ball back, and he drove down the field to set up the game-winning field goal as time expired. Now, he was running through people, around people, avoiding sacks. It was truly impressive. And for that, he's the player of the game. He went 14 of 23 for 235 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. He also rushed 10 times for 57 yards and another touchdown. Utah will play Oregon next week. Over to your Utah State Aggies, who played San Jose State and lost 21-42. We're getting to the do-or-die point for the Aggies, as they need to win 3 of their next 4 games to hope for bowl eligibility. Up front on offense and defense, they were dominated by San Jose State. I mean, it wasn't even close. They just got ruined. Their 10-game win streak over San Jose State is now dead because they lost. Utah State has a bye next week, and again, they need to win 3 of their next 4 for bowl eligibility. Utah Tech Trailblazers played North Alabama and lost 30-31. Losing a game, especially by 1 point, is a hard pill to swallow. Perhaps more when it's self-inflicted. The Trailblazers racked up 505 total offensive yards, but it wasn't enough. Halfway through the second quarter, the Trailblazers found themselves down 10-0. From there, the teams would trade blows with a culminating in a tie game, 24-24, 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. From there, North Alabama would go on a 9-play, 74-yard drive, chewing up 4 minutes and 29 seconds on the clock. Utah Tech would answer with an 8-play, 69-yard drive that lasted just over 1 minute. They would score, and then head coach Paul Peterson decided to end it right there, electing to go for 2. Well, they didn't get it. Utah Tech would fail to convert, and their onside kick would be recovered by North Alabama. Game over. Utah Tech will play Eastern Kentucky next week. Over to your Southern Utah Thunderbirds, who played Austin PA University and won 48-45. Excuse me, they lost 45-48. Austin PA won the game. It's a tragic loss as the Thunderbirds went into halftime up 20-14, and then they scored another touchdown at the start of the third quarter to go up 35-14. However, Austin PA would rattle off 28 straight points, and the only reason we even went into OT was because Southern Utah was able to have a 6-play, 75-yard drive that lasted just over a minute to kick a game-tying field goal. From there, in overtime, they would get a stop on defense, an interception. Then they'd get the ball back. They'd go to kick a field goal to win the game, and it bounced off the left upright. Start of the second overtime, they have the ball. They can't get a touchdown, so they kick a field goal. Now they're up. Okay, it's 45-42. Then Austin PA would get the ball. They have a couple of decent plays. They get onto a 3rd and long, and then all of a sudden the quarterback dropped back, hit a slant. The wide receiver broke a tackle. Game over. 45-42. Austin PA walks off with the win. Southern Utah will play Albine Christian University next week. Now, my game of the week for next week. Oregon versus Utah. I have it going 21-31, Utah winning. Now, don't get me wrong. Oregon is good, and their defense is somewhat slept on, but Utah and Kyle Whittingham are going to try and find a way to win. And if you can't run the ball at Utah all game and wear them down, you can't win. The only team to be able to do that to Utah this year was Oregon State. And how did they do it? They ran the ball, had strategic play actions, and they hit them over and over and over again. Now that Utah seems to have a quarterback, they have a stable of running backs, and they're somewhat healthy, I don't think Oregon's going to win. Now, I get Oregon's offense is number 1 in the nation, but you have to be able to wear down Utah. You can't just have flashy, explosive plays. Utah needs a team to punch them in the mouth for 4 straight quarters. Oregon's best win is over Wazoo, and we know Wazoo has been playing well at all. Bo Nix will be stunned, and Oregon won't know how to adjust. Utah wins here in a game that is closer than it should be. Now, your player of the week. I thought about this. Bo Nix had a great game. We have crazy wins like John Schofield doing good things for Carroll. But there was one guy who really just stood out to me. PLU quarterback Darius Shathan. This, to me, was pretty simple. As a reminder of his stats, he went 17 of 20 for 276 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also added 7 rushes for 65 yards and another touchdown. Now, I want you to hear these stats for his year because these are crazy. Year to date, Darius Shathan is 119 of 176 with a 67.6 completion rate. He's passed for 1,525 yards and 16 touchdowns. His efficiency rating is 163.6. He also has 4 rushing touchdowns on the year. Now wait for this, because here's how he ranks in the Northwestern Conference with those stats. His completion percentage is 3rd. His yards is 2nd. His passing touchdowns is 2nd. His efficiency rating is 3rd. Rushing touchdowns, he is 4th. Yes, that is for all players, including running backs. He has the 4th most touchdowns. Overall, he's put up 1,789 yards of total offense. Good enough for 1st in the Northwest Conference. He is putting a strong resume together to be the player of the year. All right, on to your Kraken. We got to have a Kraken update, right? Your Kraken are 1-4-1, and it's not ideal, especially when you lose your homestand. Matty Berniers finally has a point on the year, and Ty Cartier has improved on his on-ice time to be sitting at +1. The devastating news this week is obviously the loss of Andrew Burkowski, who has some sort of lower body injury, something on his right hip potentially. We're not going to know the length of the injury for quite some time. Hopefully, it's not long. Now, the Trailblazers for NBA basketball. It's going to be all about Scoot Henderson with some help from DeAndre Ayton. Look, there is no denying this is a down year for Portland, and they're going to be looking to rebuild. And I don't think anyone is expecting them to be competitive. But I do think seeing how Scoot and Ayton play together will help the Blazers come draft time decide, like, okay, here's how we're going to draft. Here's how we're going to build this team, right? You also got Chauncey Billups as a coach. Kind of hard to hate the guy. Should be interesting to see what they're able to draw up this year. Portland's been so stagnant for so long that I almost think trading Dame was a better thing for the franchise, right? Dame wanted to win, and he was tired of having the Blazers say, yeah, we'll get something, and we're going to pay these other guys decent money, and nothing was really happening. And Dame knew that, so he wanted to go to a contender. Portland, because they're Portland, decided that they were going to trade him to Milwaukee, which Milwaukee might be the favorites to win the championship. I understand Denver's great, but no, Milwaukee team's going to be special. You can't be in purgatory in basketball. You either have to be all in or all out, because mid-seasons, fans don't care about that. You either want to win or you want to lose. The Seahawks can be 10-7, and people are going to support them. The Seahawks can be 9-8 or whatever it is, right? They can be 7-9, and they're still going to have people competitive for them every single week. Things are going well. The NBA, you can't have that. You either have the pieces to win a championship or you don't. Right now, the Trailblazers don't. They haven't for quite some time. So I'm really hoping with Scoot and Ayton, they're able to kind of build something, and then the front office can say, here's what we need. Go for it, grab them, and get them. We have one other NBA team we cover, the Utah Jazz. Now, the Jazz are in a weird spot because they're literally all in on Lauri Markkanen. But I don't know if they're deep enough to actually be all in on a championship run. They're competing in an extremely deep West. Now, this should be interesting. They won't be great, but they won't be a dumpster fire. Just like Portland has been, they're currently in that NBA purgatory, but they haven't had a year going all in on Lauri Markkanen and having him be the dude. So maybe he elevates his team to a new level, or maybe he struggles, and we got to look for something else. Let's see how the first month plays out, and then let's make predictions. I think we could be shocked, but you never truly know. Again, guys, we're covering NBA, we're covering some NHL. The second MLB offseason moves start happening and the second things start getting a little more competitive, we'll start checking in on those things. But for now, I hope you guys are really enjoying the season. We got 4 or 5 more weeks of really just crazy football, and then we start focusing in on playoffs and how things are going to line up there. So, again, my name's Jay with Pacific Northwest Sports. I love doing this in the morning for you guys. Let me know how we can continue to be better together. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.